I think tone is important in the independent movement. You have a lot of people who are just angry, and they're always going to be angry, and they're going to beat up on the parties. I don't know that that helps us a lot, because the reality is candidates today and incumbents are responding to the incentive structure that lets them keep their job. And we all do that in every walk of life. If you're a street sweeper or a doctor, you do the things that let you keep your job and get ahead. And so we can beat up incumbent Republicans and Democrats for their behavior, but it's not going to change anything because they're acting rationally within the system. If we can change the system, we will change their behavior. And that's where the independent space is contributing so much to the politics of the country.
It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome to Forward one of the biggest leaders for independent politics in the country. You might know him from NBC and MSNBC, where he's an analyst. Former member of Congress out of the state of Florida, David Jolly. Welcome, David.
Andrew, it's great to finally be with you on your podcast. Congrats on this, by the way.
Oh, thanks, brother. So you and I got to know each other when you were heading something called the Serve America movement that merged with Forward over the summer. What the heck was SAM?
It was one of those groups in this restless independent space that you found yourself in. Coming out of 2016, now I was just leaving Congress. I was still a registered Republican, but a group of, call them disaffected voters, equally really Republicans and Democrats coming out of the 2016 election, said they wanted to do something different. They wanted to shake things up. They wanted to create more choice in American politics. And so they launched the Serve America movement, not really sure they would admit what they were about to take on, about to do. They found themselves on a bit of a journey. They ran unity tickets for governor and lieutenant governor in the state of New York and the state of Connecticut, meaning a Republican and a Democrat on the same ticket. They kind of set out to be a centrist party. They did well enough to get ballot access in future elections, to get some party recognition. But what they discovered along the way was, one, creating a new political coalition is really hard. And the fundamental thing they discovered is if you start out by saying, hey, we want everybody to believe what we believe, you immediately set a ceiling. And so I joined them, I guess, about the time they were undergoing that discovery, that they had hit a ceiling trying to be a centrist party. And they asked me to help lead the organization to the next stage. And the next stage was a few years redefining our value proposition as a big tent, and then ultimately leading me to you and Forward to join the Forward Coalition and the newly merged party that you have.
Well, David, you have a deeply personal journey yourself where I think it's fair to call you one of the non-Trump fans in the Republican Party, and you wound up running afoul of party orthodoxy. Though you often say it's a bit deeper than that, that even when you were a Republican, you weren't necessarily a good Republican.
That's it. Yeah, look, I was never a good enough Republican. I call myself kind of a Bush 41 Republican. And truly, I use that reference because as I was coming of age, Bush 41 was breaking up with the NRA, which actually was a pretty significant inflection point. As Gingrich brought in the Gingrich Revolution, I was a pretty tried and true conservative, at least in theory. I believe in certain conservative economic theories. But we clearly saw the cultural revolution within the Republican Party. And then you saw the outsized influence of a number of special interest groups, including the NRA, which led to the Bush 41 moment. Look, Bush 43, we were at a time at war. He was doing things that I generally agreed with. But then as Bush 43 wasn't conservative enough for a lot of Republicans and the emergence of the Tea Party happened, that's where I really started my long breakup, if you will. I was a lifetime Hill staffer in and out of Congress in virtually every capacity. So I had a front row seat at a lot of the evolution. I did not anticipate in 2013 running and ultimately being elected to Congress. And I immediately was not a good enough Republican the day I arrived. The joke, Andrew, this is interesting. It was this nationally watched special election, not because of the candidates, but because it was a 50-50 district. Obama had won it twice. A Republican member of Congress had it and passed away in office. My predecessor did. So both major parties and all the special interest groups came in, about $25 million in about 10 or 12 weeks. And so they defined Jolly as an NRA, pro-life, down-the-line chamber, anti-union, right to work, all of those special interest groups who thought they were helping me, spent money on my behalf. Ultimately, I got elected. And the moment I started voting, they had whiplash. They're like, wait, who's this guy? And the NRCC said, wait, what are you doing? You're not with us in lockstep on every step of the every vote. So even before Trump, on issues like marriage equality, climate science, gun control, campaign finance reform, immigration reform, I was one of those thorns in the side of the party saying, look, we're going in the wrong direction, and we can actually win by going in this other direction, by actually giving voice to more people. And then the bomb of Donald Trump arrived on the scene, and that was it for me. I say this not asking for credit, but as a timestamp, in December of 15 on the House floor, for a couple of years, I became the only Republican to speak out against Donald Trump on the House floor and to say, no way, we're not doing this. And it was after he called for the Muslim ban. But then when others came around, you know, Paul Ryan and I actually on exactly the same day that following summer said, I'm not there yet when he got the nomination. Paul Ryan found a way to get there. I never did, and ultimately left the party shortly thereafter.
Yeah, so you've joked with me in other environments that you think that when you leave something like the GOP on principle, then everyone respects you. But but in real life, what it means is you step out off of a cliff, and then there's no new group there to greet you.
You sound like you have some experience in that, Andrew. Look, we could also title this segment "Why Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, dear friends of ours, will never be Speaker of the House or President of the United States." The reality is there just is not a coalition for you, and in some ways it makes sense. Okay, you leave the Republican Party, you say the hard truths about your former colleagues, and now they don't want you. You're not welcome there anymore. The Democrats, from my perspective, leaving the Republican Party, the Democratic Party says, oh, we really like when Jolly, tells the truth about Republicans. But in their defense, they already have a coalition that represents their values. And so, great, Jolly says the right things on climate and democracy and LGBT and guns, but we're already there. So it's not like there's this huge reward like the Democrats say, oh, we need Jolly to come over and be a spokesperson. Absolutely not. They don't need Kinzinger, and they don't need Cheney, and they don't need others. So you do find yourself in this no man's land where, though 40% of the country, as you well know and speak to, continues to identify as politically independent, there is nothing that binds that 40% together. There is no coalition. We're just all parties of one, if you will, which then led me into the independent space to try to figure out how do you navigate this and how do we create a platform for more people?
I think you were the flag bearer for independent politics, essentially the last several years. So one big learning was, look, trying to dictate top-down beliefs is not a workable way to build said coalition, particularly when you're talking about independence. What are the other lessons or battle scars from your time as, in my mind, either the or one of the foremost leaders for independent politics?
No, you're very kind. You as well, many leaders, and we follow many others. Look, the true battle scars are that the system's rigged. The system's been built for the two major parties, right? I mean, look, Coke and Pepsi would be happy to go to federal court to sue against a new market entrant because they have all the power. So it's not a surprise. The system's rigged in favor of the two major parties to try to quash the participation of independents and minor parties. I would say, though, the philosophical journey, if there's one big thing, I mean, this is really what I wrestle with because I think it could change how we talk about politics. We do talk about how can you coalesce minor parties or new parties, and we start with this idea, as you mentioned, of a top-down belief. Everybody has to believe in a certain thing. Well, if you start to break away from that, you move to the Big Tent approach, which is how can we get Jolly and Yang and Christy Todd Whitman on the same platform? That's a traditional Big Tent approach. That's great too, but let's push that further. And the further is the one big thing, which is Jolly's in favor of lower taxes but an assault weapons ban. Jolly's in favor of greater LGBT defense and personal liberty defenses, but he's also in favor of robust religious liberties. How can we speak to all of that? And honestly, I think the Democratic Party at times tries to do that. I mean, I think the Democratic Party is slowly recognizing there's opportunity there to bring in a broader coalition. But that one big thing is not that a big tent has to include more than one person. It's that one person themselves needs a bigger tent. Because where can Jolly exercise my politics to lower taxes and ban assault weapons? That party does not exist today. The Democrats would say, come with us on guns. Republicans would say, come with us on taxes. But don't talk about those other things. We don't want you to talk about those other things. So for me, it's also why I didn't join another party leaving the Republican Party. It was that discovery that the parties today crush independent thought. They crush it. My experience on the House floor routinely as a Republican member of Congress was that if I wanted to speak out to basic ideas of where the country was on a lot of these issues we've discussed, I was the outlier. I was told to be quiet. The money would dry up. I wasn't allowed to do that. But again, as I mentioned, there wasn't a welcome embrace from the Democratic side because they didn't need to in their defense. And that's the big thing. People's own politics are left, right, and middle. If you really self-examine where you are on issues, rarely are you so rigid that you're in exactly the same spot on every single issue we face ideologically. So how do we create that freedom of independent thought? How do we celebrate it? And honestly, how do we elevate this idea of pluralism that the country was founded on?
This program is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's a holiday season, which is a happy and festive time for many, but it's also a challenging time for many. And if you get down to the dumps, it's a great time to get some help. I first saw a therapist when I was a teenager and have been a big believer in therapy ever since. And as the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has already matched 3 million people and counting with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist, and if things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. Think about it. Why would you necessarily need to go into an office when you can get therapy right from the comfort of your own home in a way that's accessible, private, and affordable? This is therapy of the future. I'm really glad that we're sponsored by BetterHelp. You can learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/yang. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/yang. They made a number of moves recently to adjust the presidential nomination states, or at least it's looking like in the Democratic Party. So Iowa, where I spent a lot of time, looks like it's getting booted. And it's going to be replaced by South Carolina at the head of the line. Coincidentally, the reason why Joe Biden became president. Yeah. I'm sure it's a total coincidence.
Andrew, you're on it. People say, what does this mean for other candidates? Joe Biden's no fool. He knows if he's got somebody biting at his ankles in a primary, he'll walk away in South Carolina pretty happy.
Yeah. So this is more or less the Joe Biden calendar. But one of the things that I find uncomfortable is that you have the polarization of the parties. And what got me here was realizing that the polarization is just going to get worse. Where almost half of Democrats regard Republicans as corrupt and a threat to the country, and about the same percentage of Republicans feel that way about Democrats. Percentages are going up. And you and I remember when your home state of Florida was a swing state. It might not be anymore. Yeah. Iowa was a swing state that Obama won. Ohio was the quintessential swing state. Missouri was a quintessential swing state. And now the Democrats are essentially pulling up stakes out of Iowa, so you can kiss Iowa goodbye for the Democrats essentially forever, as far as I can tell. I mean, it was +9 Trump, I believe, and the last Democratic House member, Cindy Axne, just lost her race. And so you see this identification of the parties kind of skewing, where before they were talking to the same states, at least in the early contests, but now, yeah. And the despair I have is that the Democrats look up and say, well, Iowa, Ohio, Missouri, shrug, you're too Midwestern, not diverse enough, so we're going to trade you in for Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, who would like more our speed. and it just accelerates these different tribal identities that are having different conversations.
Yeah, so let's talk about tribalism culturally, because I think we're entering a new era, frankly, in our culture, and I want to investigate that a little bit. I would say on the primaries, let's see what happens. I do think the Democratic Party, in moving to South Carolina, arguably gravitated more towards what their coalition currently looks like, right? And I think that's your point. Like, they moved to their home playing field as opposed to trying to appeal to some of the states they're losing, right? The flyover states, white agriculture, and so forth. I think what Democrats would say is South Carolina has a proper representation of communities of color that we didn't achieve in earlier states. We have an agrarian economy. We have white working class. There's more diversity that represents who we are as a party. But you are stepping away from voters then that you don't currently have, which is the yin and the yang of it. I would suggest Republicans are making a huge tactical error, and have been for a decade, in continuing to consolidate their base of white Christian America and ignore a lot of attempt at diversity. Donald Trump actually tried more than anybody else. He just did so in a highly offensive way that nobody could really celebrate. But let's talk a little bit about tribalism, because I'm fascinated. I have a theory. Now, I'm not an academic, so I'm going to posit a theory that may or may not work and hope an academic at some point in the next decade runs with it.
Some academics listen to this, so go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. I actually think we've entered, call it the post-information age as a stakeholder term. And the reason it's important is I think the information age, between mass media, social media, everything else we have, has achieved breaking down the geographic communities that have held us together, right? You used to know your neighbors, know who your neighbors were. We got up in the morning, we read one local newspaper, which, forget about their bent. This isn't left or right. We all started
most local newspapers were centrist, but continue.
Yeah, but we started with the same narrative every day. We lived in the same ecosystem, and there was a bond to that, a stickiness to that. There were 6 or 8 churches, there were 6 or 8 civic clubs, there were 6 or 8 schools. What the information delivered to us is the ability to now ignore those communities. In some places, the pillars have been broken down, and your community now is all over the world. And your community is the community that shares your view of the world, your tribe, right? So now you wake up, and if you're a Mark Levin junkie, you're more in line with the Mark Levin junkie 5 states away, and you're communicating with them. And in doing so, you're creating, a hurdle between you and your actual community participants, your physical community participants. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because we now don't have the relationships that held us together. And our relationships actually represent the divisions we have as opposed to what we shared in common. I think this is real. Like, we feel it, right? We feel it. But I actually think we need to begin to study, what does this mean for how we all share this wonderful country? And what does it mean for how we share a democracy? Because now we immediately are pitted against each other based on our allegiances, not based on our communities. The tribalism piece, I don't know how we solve. I really don't. We almost have to ask for people to respond to their better angels. But the challenge just can be too hard on a day-to-day basis to do that.
You know, my favorite stuff to wear that makes me feel super heroic nowadays is my Forward hoodie, the Forward cap, Forward t-shirts. So we get new arrivals all the time. If you want to do something fun, start conversations, support Forward's work, go to shop.forwardparty.com and check out the swag. Pins, cups, thermoses. Is that the same thing? No, it's not. Suitcases, TV sets. We actually don't sell either of those. Go to shop.forwardparty.com for the funnest ways to support Forward. You talk about how the system is now rigged for the two parties, and there was just a dump on Twitter about how both the major parties were in touch with various administrators to get various people and messages blocked on a scale that most people did not realize was happening.
Yeah.
So you and I are trying to do something fascinating, which is create more options and alternatives in a system that is tries to prevent that. So what do you see as the biggest opportunities? I feel like you and I are operators and tacticians, and you look around and you scratch your chin and you're like, like, okay, you built a system. The system's supposed to make it very hard for people like us. So what are the opportunities? And there's sometimes some really unfair retaliation where you talked about how Serve America movement got on the ballot in the state of New York, which was very, very difficult. And then Governor Cuomo just wiped it out with a stroke of a pen, and there was no popular uproar.
Yeah.
It was just like, and I don't like the fact that you guys now have party access and just arbitrarily raise the threshold. I mean, that was bananas.
Yeah, yeah. So in the state of New York, I believe at the time there were 8 parties. Cynthia Nixon, everybody knows her outside of New York from Sex and the City. Remember, she challenged Cuomo and was a thorn in his side. She did so on a minor party line. So when she loses, Cuomo says, you know what, I'm just going to eliminate the bottom 4 political parties in the state of New York. And poof, if you were registered with the Serve America movement or one of those other parties, you got a letter from the state saying, hey, it doesn't exist anymore. Not because the Serve America movement went away, but because Cuomo said, I don't want people to participate in those minor parties. So look, that is in some ways graft, if you will, as opposed to structural, needing structural reform. I would say, what are the 2 opportunities? Electoral reform, you're one of the best evangelists for that. What we saw in Alaska moving to the top 4, and then ranked choice voting, where on election day they elect a statewide Republican senator and a statewide Democratic member of Congress because they can think rationally and they can vote by consensus. We're seeing the electoral reform movement grow. A lot of the hurdles are the incumbent parties don't want it. So a lot of states, they say, no, voters, you're not allowed to have this authority. We're going to keep this authority as legislators. But electoral reform structurally, without question. And then 2, something you know well, the media ecosystem would benefit from investment in a much more robust independent space. And there's a supply and demand question here. We chase affirmation where we can find it. And so right now we have a lot of major media platforms whose viewership is pretty well defined. But there is not that singular place, that town square, that platform for people who are really independent or who are big tent, or like myself, whose politics are left, right, and middle. That doesn't exist, and it will take a significant investment from an entrepreneur or philanthropist to say, I'm going to commit to 3 to 5 years to make this happen. But I think the audience is there, and we see little snippets of it, right? What Smirkanish has done, what Cuomo arguably is trying to do and News Nation is trying to do, we'll see if it's successful. But you have people testing that independent, unaffiliated audience. That platform doesn't exist. But all of these things, from structural reform to media, frankly, to the formation of new minor parties, is about coalescing this 40% of the country that continues to say, I can't see myself in either partisan bucket.
The governor of Connecticut recently came out for ranked choice voting, and that was the result of the gubernatorial run you discussed earlier that I think you had a hand in. You actually were standing there grinning like a Cheshire cat at the governor's announcement because you were like, well, I knew how much work this took. Tell everyone how the heck that endorsement of RCV came to pass in Connecticut. And then we can talk a little bit about the next steps, because the governor endorsing it doesn't mean it's a done deal.
Yeah. So look, the independent reform space, I say, is kind of 3 lanes. You have the let's all get along lane, right? Our friends over at No Labels that say R's and D's should work together. You have the electoral reform lane that says we want ranked choice voting, open primaries, gerrymandering reform. And then you have the new party lane, people who have decided the only way to really effectuate change, to get people to do something, is to create a party that can compete with them. And so in that 3rd lane, where the Serve America movement started to operate, we ran a unity ticket, as I mentioned, for Connecticut governor and lieutenant governor. In a lot of states, including in Connecticut, if you achieve a certain vote threshold, 3%, 5%, whatever the number is, you receive a ballot line for the next gubernatorial race, meaning you get to automatically nominate somebody to be on the ballot. Well, in some states, they also have what's called fusion voting, where you can nominate, multiple parties can nominate the same person. New York does this. For instance, the Working Families Party and the Democratic Party nominates typically Chuck Schumer and AOC, and it allows the minor party to have a little bit of influence. So in Connecticut, they had both. We achieved minor party status to get the ballot line, and they have fusion voting. Now, this is where a lot of people say, well, aren't minor parties spoilers, or why do you even care about 3 to 5%? Because you can change the world with it, and we knew that.
Yep.
And so we
Amen.
got a ballot line for the 22, this past November's gubernatorial race, and we had the opportunity to nominate whomever we wanted. We could have nominated the guy down the street, or we could have nominated either of the major party candidates. The Connecticut State Committee for the Serve America Movement, which operates under a couple different names under state law, actually interviewed the governor and the Republican nominee and some of the others and said, look, our big goal is not necessarily to win the 22 election. Realistically, that's probably out of reach. But what we would like to do is ask for you to help voters be empowered with ranked choice voting. And in that case, the incentives lined up for the incumbent governor to say, if I endorse ranked choice voting, and I promise to try to get it through the legislature, can I have your third party line so that I can give voters multiple ways to vote for me? And so the Serve America movement did. And ultimately, we had that press conference, which you're describing, where this minor party announced the nomination of the sitting governor, and in turn, the sitting governor announced that he would help get ranked choice voting through the legislature. So how can you help? The Connecticut legislature has to pass the bill. The governor has to introduce the bill. The legislature has to pass it and get it signed into law. And honestly, the momentum is there for electoral reform. So if you're in Connecticut or have Connecticut ties, lean in on this one and try to insist that the governor and the legislature passes ranked choice voting.
You know what we all do and we want to do more of? Sleep. But one way we can feel like we slept more is actually improve the mattress that you're sleeping on. I've been a mattress guy since my 20s when it seemed impossible to afford a decent mattress. And right now, the mattress I'm sleeping on, yes, it's true, is a Helix Sleep premium mattress. The Helix lineup includes 14 unique mattresses, and you can figure out which one is best for you via a personalized quiz. Why sleep on a one-size-fits-all mattress when you can get one that's customized for you and have it 100 nights risk-free? That's how confident they are that you're going to love this mattress that's made for you via the Helix Sleep quiz. Don't take my word for it. It's also the #1 mattress pick by GQ, Wired, chiropractors. Everyone that knows mattresses loves this thing, including my kids. Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. With Helix, better sleep starts now. The name of the org officially is Connecticut Voters First, so everyone Google that if you're in Connecticut or have friends in Connecticut. But the governor is going to talk about ranked choice voting in his State of the State address in January, and then there should be a bill on the docket by February. So we're going to try and get a lot of people signed up in January of next year. But I want people to think about what this took, where you know what politicians respond to? Politics. You had 2 folks from each major party running for governor. Their consultant said, hey, whoever gets this line probably gets 3% as an edge, taking into account that this third party ticket got 4% in the previous cycle. So the consultant said this line's worth 3%. So being rational politicians, both the Democrat and Republican wound up endorsing ranked choice voting. There are some people who look at the independent party space and say, oh, don't do that, like reform, but don't have the independent party. And it's like, well, the independent party was necessary to force the reform by getting that ballot line that got the 3% incentive for folks. So, David, I'm so inspired by what you all accomplished in Connecticut. I want to do the same thing nationwide. So check it out. Here's how we do it nationwide. The 2020 presidential race was decided by about 70,000 voters in 4 states. And there are going to be about 6 swing states in 2024. We know what they are. It's Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Georgia are the 4 core swing states. And then you could throw in Michigan and Pennsylvania, though those were a little bit more of a spread. So let's go get 4% of the voters, the independent swing voters in those 6 swing states, just to raise their hands and say, hey, we will support whichever major party candidate supports nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting and gets out of the way of the ballot initiatives that'll probably be on the ballot in 2024 in Nevada and maybe Arizona and a couple of other states.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. It's a perfect place to put the energy of the independent movement. And you touched on a couple themes there. First is the incentive structure. You know, I think tone is important in the independent movement. You have a lot of people who are just angry, and they're always going to be angry, and they're going to beat up on the parties. I don't know that helps us a lot, because the reality is candidates today and incumbents are responding to the incentive structure that lets them keep their job. And we all do that in every walk of life. If you're a street sweeper or a doctor, you do the things that let you keep your job and get ahead. And so we can beat up incumbent Republicans and Democrats for their behavior, but it's not going to change anything because they're acting rationally within the system. If we can change the system, we will change their behavior. You articulate this perfectly well, Andrew, when you're out across the country. If we change the incentives, we change their behavior. And that's where the independent space is contributing so much to the politics of the country. The independent space likes to get kicked around and, oh, these rabble-rousers are doing bad things. No. Look, if the independent space changes the incentive structure in the country, then one of the 2 major parties is going to realize, wait a minute, if we broaden our tent, if we reach for more consensus, and we can get rewarded for it, I've said this to my Democratic friends, you would have a governing coalition for the next 3 decades. You would be a 60% party, not a 51 or 52% party. And within the independent space, there are reasons to say we need a multi-party democracy. It is all over the world. We are the outlier in not having it. All of the metrics, all the studies say multi-party democracy is more effective. But in the screwed up way we do politics in America, if the contribution of multi-party advocates is to actually create a bigger tent within one of the major parties that says, wait, we want to represent more and more of America, that's a heck of a contribution and something to be proud of.
Yeah, the truth is, even if you had ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries, the winner is going to be a Democrat or Republican most of the time. Because they still have
right.
baked in set of resources and people with party identification. You would have some folks emerge every so often, but the incentives would be better for the people in power. I mean, like in my own way. Yeah.
Right? She's the perfect case study of what you get.
I just want things to work better for the American people. And I'm convinced that the incentives you're talking about are the path, even if it means that the 2 major parties are just doing a better job, and that's not necessarily I do think having new party entrants is going to help spur better policy and more genuine engagement with how people and families are doing. So, David, the thing that upsets me the most is that for each major party now, the incentives are just to try and eke out the next election. I mean, I talk a little bit about how if you're a Democrat, it's like, well, now I don't have to care about Iowa, Ohio, or Missouri anymore because you're red. And, I've spent time in each of those states. And guess what? There's still human beings there. And, Democrats and Republicans alike.
That's right.
It's like maybe you should still care.
Yeah.
And the quality of life in this country has been degrading and eroding in various ways in every community in different ways. I mean, we're 31st in the world now in various core measurements. But neither party needs to really, really focus on that because you're like, well, and this is what you were talking about before with the tribalism and the deterioration of local media and civic engagement. There was a quote from Michael Grunwald that scared the shit out of me, but I think it was probably right. He's a political journalist. He said there's a theory that we're now in an era where the appearance of governing is more important than actual governing.
Yeah.
Because the media echo chambers are so strong that it's more about how you're making people feel than about policy. And I was like, oh God, that's frightening.
True.
But some of the numbers I've seen actually indicate that we might be there. My great goal is to try and pull us back from that and have people actually have to be accountable to the facts on the ground.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that stunned me since I started traveling the country in 2011 was how negative a lot of the country feels. Like that. This is like that. There's like this real sense of struggle, nearing desperation in a lot of places.
Yeah. Andrew, look, consider in the state of Florida, my home state, people say, oh, it's now a red state. No, it's not. 45 to 48% of the state wants to go in a different direction. So it's not a red state. You can make the case that Alabama slightly might be more of a red state because it's 70-30, but the politics are split. But the system is set up where it's a winner-take-all system, and so the minor party voters or minor interest voters don't have to be represented. And I would, look, I'm a preacher's kid, and so maybe I'm not well suited for politics, though I say that I learned by watching the politics of the church, which can be far more vicious. But in terms of how I tried to serve, it didn't align with today's structure. And I'm going to share this with you because I think it's critical for how leaders approach representative democracy. In my very first race, there was a libertarian in the race. I won 47 to 4, whatever the numbers were. And that night, after this hard-fought race, in my remarks, I said, look, I recognize tonight that more people in this community asked to be represented by somebody other than me. I only got 49% of the vote. I said, my job is to prove to everybody that I can be trusted with your voice. And then in some really personal ways, for me, the first time I was ever elected was to Congress. So it was this awesome case of first impression, this awesome honor that I felt. And
you were 1 for 1, like you never lost an election.
I never lost. I didn't lose. I got redistricted 2 or 3 times. I never lost until the final race. I got redistricted 6 races later. But I will tell you, I asked myself a question, and I think it's important that you can actually go to the Federalist Papers. There's some contemplation of this. It was my job as a member of Congress to give voice to the entire community or to only those voters who voted for me. And I would suggest that the vast majority of elected officials today think it's the latter, that if they just give voice to the people that voted for them, they will repeat the formula for their reelection, and they're fine.
Especially given our party primary system, yeah.
I think it's a higher calling than that. And so I was willing to test that theory. And here's the cool thing. My district was 50-50. The district I represented was 50-50. Obama had won it, and a Republican had won it. I set out to try to give voice to everybody. My first race I won with 49% of the vote. The next race I won with 70% of the vote. There's a reward for it. Now, I was undergoing all these redistrictings, and ultimately it came back to bite me in a presidential year because I had ticked off Republicans and Democrats had their person, as I mentioned. But I do think there's a reward in politics for giving voice even to those who didn't vote for you. And ultimately, what's behind structural reform and electoral reform and all these things we're talking about is to try to reward people that actually give voice to their community and not just their party. If we can get there, then we'll accept the outcomes of elections. We'll accept the outcomes of policy making. We won't see people try to topple the government because they didn't get their way and they feel cheated, because now we will have restored trust between those who are elected to serve and the voters who elect them.
Oh, David Rubenstein, the founder of Carlyle Group, was on the podcast a number of months ago, and he said that he talks to members of Congress all the time. And he said that that when he talks to members of Congress, they are very, very focused on trying to keep their job. They're really scared of losing their job. But then after they lose their job, they're a lot happier. He said he sees it all the time.
Yeah.
So you're friends now with any number of former members, some of whom are former members because they did the right thing, sort of like you did, where you stood up to the party and then got attacked and the rest of it, and then have now gone down this other road. What do you think about David's comments?
I agree with it, but I have very little patience because of what we just talked about. I think when you're elected to serve, you should feel the calling to do what's right. My wife and I called it the sleep well at night test. And here's an example I'll give you. I went into Congress. There are a lot of issues I changed my mind on in Congress. When I felt the responsibility to give voice to consensus, there were some issues I changed my mind on. Guns was one where I very aggressively moved to the left. The other was campaign finance. I would have said at the beginning of my career, money is speech and should be unregulated. I now think we should eliminate money from politics, use public finance, and get commercials off the air. I think it's not only corrupt, but honestly, I'll tell you right now, every member of Congress spends more time raising money than doing their job. And so
Sure.
what I introduced in Congress was called the STOP Act. It landed me on 60 Minutes. They did a bunch of secret cameras in the NRCC, which you can imagine what that did for my reputation. But I gave a speech about it, and it was very simple. The STOP Act said, no member of Congress can ask anybody for money. That's it. Listen, here are the two caveats.
And right now, it's like 60% of their waking hours. But go ahead.
That's right, and that was my point. My point was put down the phone and get back to work. So if you're not in office, if you're a challenger, whatever the opportunity cost is to your family or your job, that's fine. There's no public cost to that. That's a decision you make. Once you're elected, there's a public cost to spending all your time raising money. And so that was a most important thing. Secondly, your campaign can still go raise money, right? You can have a campaign manager and a fundraiser and all those people that get paid to do that part of the job. But as a member of Congress, my bill is 2 pages, said you're not allowed to ask anybody for money. So I got maybe 5 or 6 people to co-sponsor the bill with me. And I acknowledged at the time, it will take a scandal for this bill to actually get the light of day. 60 minutes.
Those are 5 or 6 cool people. Like, was that across party lines, or were they just
it
Republicans?
Was. Yeah. We got Republicans and Democrats. Now, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I wish I could do this, but I can't, so forth. But here's to your point. Steve Israel, who is a friend of mine, a New York congressman at the time, also the director of the Democrats' campaign arm, spent a bunch of money trying to beat me. He was interviewed on 60 Minutes and said, Jolly's idea will never work. It's a joke. He's just playing theater. I went to the House floor, and I gave the speech about the STOP Act. And I begged my colleagues, I said, please, you all know this is true. And do something about it while you have the power, while you're in office, until you get out of office and admit to the truth and then lament that you didn't do anything about it. It's the incentive structure, right? And at some point, the conversations around structural reform have to move to whether and how we get to judge elected officials. Because at some point, our elected officials are not honoring the greater good. They're not actually solving the problems for us. They're protecting their own career. We get to judge that however we choose to. We can do it with our voice or we can do it with our vote. But regardless of any structural reform, we need an informed electorate that says enough is enough. We've got to stop the current behaviors of our incumbent elected members of Congress.
Amen. So, David, you and I have done our share of stumping around the country for Forward. I really enjoy being your wingman, and anytime that we get to share a stage. Most people would say that this is maybe one of the most exciting times they've seen in a generation for independent politics. You've been at this for a number of years. What are you excited about moving forward? And then also, what lies ahead for you? How can people follow you, support you? Because, I think people watching and listening to this be like, oh, shit, like, if we had more people like David in positions of power, we might be in a lot better shape.
Well, Andrew, you as well. Listen, I mean, all I knew of Andrew Yang was the brand and the presidential candidate when I first called you and said, hey, let's try to make this work alongside of a bunch of other good-intended people. It's been a pleasure for me to get to know you. Here's why I think it's so exciting. And so here's the important corporate disclaimer we always use. I'm not formally affiliated with Forward, but I am a champion of the independent and minor party space, and I'm excited about what Forward is doing, because what we are seeing at Forward is this catalyzing of the movement that you rarely get to see. And so here's a little bit of inside ball game for the success that is happening, and I think it's critical, and frankly all the pundits are missing this when it comes to Forward in the minor party space. The success is in the organizing at the state level. where hundreds and thousands of people are signing up and saying, in my state, I want to do the things under state law that allow us to achieve ballot access, that allow us to achieve party recognition, that allow us to run candidates for county commission and dog catcher and Congress. And the interesting thing is all of that happens without the notice of the pundits or the newspapers, because that's where the success of the movement happens. And what you've done at Forward is you've created a platform now where people across the country can go to a Forward party or a Forward chapter in their state, get involved, and create the success. At the national level, when you think of national parties, they really only exist for a few limited reasons. One is brand, right? You have to build and communicate a brand in 2022. So what is that brand at Forward? It's a bottom-up, state-focused coalition of 50 state parties that want to create a multi-party democracy and celebrate independent thought. That's an incredible value proposition. So national exists to maintain and grow the brand, and then to provide critical resources, legal resources, political consulting resources, evaluation of where races might make sense and not. The structure is really at the state level. The brand sits at the national level. And while all the pundits focus on the brand and say, well, what's going on with the brand, they're missing what's happening across the country. You live it every day. This movement is alive. And at Forward, you have the people smart enough to take on the rigged system and say, we're going to create successes in these dozen places. And then people are going to wake up and say, wait, I just missed this story, and now it's changed American politics potentially forever.
Yeah, and everyone watching and listening can be part of this story in your state. If you go to forwardparty.com, just click on your state, you'll meet some awesome people who are doing the real work. Like a lot of people will look at something and then turn away. Others will roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. And Forward is filled with the latter,
Right.
that's how great things are built. And oh, by the way, the country needs it. And our political
That's right.
system desperately needs a body of motivated citizens to build this alternative.
That's exactly right. And as you've mentioned before, I know, 500,000 elected offices in the country, and 60 or 70% of them go uncontested with only one candidate. If you're listening to this today, think about in your community how many local elected offices there are, many that go uncontested. That is an opportunity to grow a party like Forward. A minor party coalition is in those races where the old axiom, there's not a Republican or Democratic way to fix a pothole. That's true. But in today's day and age, the Republicans and Democrats are going to fight over that pothole. And at Forward,
it's a Republican pothole or a Democratic pothole at this point, David. It's true. Maybe we can pull it back. Maybe you can become a Forward pothole. So how do people follow you and keep up with you and be excited about your work?
Look, externally, I live my life in part on MSNBC and Twitter at David Jolly FL. Look, at this point, I feel comfortable in the space of nonpartisan politics, objective analysis. And look, as a former Republican who does believe that the party is deeply flawed, you will hear me delivering commentary incredibly critical of my former party, and I think it's important. And here's what I would say, Andrew. You know this as well. It's an incredible gift, or not gift. It's a gift to the person to have a platform to express your opinion. I'm grateful every day that I get to participate by offering a voice. But I would also say it's not always easy to level that criticism. But I think there are certain moments where you have to. If we truly are going to fix the problems, right? Andrew Yang, it's not easy for you to say, my experience in the Democratic Party led me to the conviction that we have to create an independent space. David Jolly, yes, okay, he gets to go on TV and talk about the Republican direction. That's not always just a reward. It also comes at a cost. And so I think what people will discover in this independent movement right now is a lot of people of deep conviction. And consider the goodwill.
People are doing this for the right reasons, man. There's no other reason to do it.
Yeah, consider the goodwill and good spirit with which people arrive in the independent space. And so, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in dialogue nationally on TV. Sometimes on Twitter, we'll see the direction that's going. I don't know. I've tried to quit politics 3 times, Andrew, and it's never quite worked. So I think I'm going to stick around for a while.
That's really funny. You should have resigned yourself to it. You know, the fact that you're a preacher's kid, I ran into another preacher's kid the other night here in New York City, Chris Rock. And I just thought when you said you were a preacher's kid, I was like, wow, like preacher's kids have some magic powers. You definitely have a lot of patriotism and magic in you, my friend. David, looking forward to heading down this road with you.
Great to be with you, Andrew. Thank you for what you're doing.